In this video, we'll be taking a detailed overview of Tilea, its history, geography, and more. First, let's briefly describe what Tilea actually is. Tilea is a region located on the southern edge of the Old World, below Bretonia, east of Estalia, and west of the Border Princes. Tilea worships the classical pantheon and is one of the oldest human civilizations. While Tilean culture is some of the most advanced in the lands of men, they have never had cause to unify. As a result, Tilea is a fractured and uncentralized place, populated by city-states that fight among themselves more often than not. This constant fighting and flexible morals have led Tilea to be known as the land of the mercenary. Sellswords can always count on job opportunities to be found there, as Tilean armies are made up of mercenaries. In addition, Tilea is also infamous for launching expeditions to all corners of the world in search of riches, opportunities which few soldiers of fortune can turn down. Norskins, hobgoblins, dwarfs, halflings, ogres, and even elves can all be found selling their services here. Tilea has become a melting pot for mercenaries from across the world. Tilea is renowned for its trade and has established trade routes all around the world. The Tileans also have an unusually good relationship with the elves of Othuan, who often travel to the ports of Tilea to trade their exotic goods. Though not quite as uncommon, Tilea also has a good trading relationship with the dwarves who arrive along the Old Dwarf Road. Both the elves and the dwarves are eager to buy the goods procured by the other from the Tileans. In this fashion, Tilea has become a sort of middleman between the elves and the dwarves, who otherwise refuse to do business with one another. Tilea is composed of mostly autonomous city-states of varying sizes and influence. These city-states tend to either be principalities led by ever-changing merchant princes or burgeoning republics. While there are an unknown number of smaller city-states, most of what we know are of the 8 great city-states. Now let's quickly talk about the real-world influences of Tilea. I don't think it's a secret that Tilea is the Warhammer world's version of Italy, specifically the city-state era that lasted for much of Italy's history. In terms of topography, the Apuccini Mountains are clearly based on the Apennine Mountains, and the Isle of Sirens are likely based off Dalmatia and other assorted islands off the Croatian coast in the Adriatic Sea. The Tilean city-states take some pretty obvious influence from the Italian city-states. Miragliano is a pretty blatant example of this, what with the city being located at the bend of a peninsula and built on several small islands in a marshy region that now houses canals frequented by gondolas. It may be on the opposite side of the peninsula, but Miragliano is obviously Venice, though it takes influence from more than just Venice, as you'll see. This is true for all the Italian city-states. They're all a combination of a lot of Italian historical influences. I have some guesses as to the main influences of some of the city-states. I would guess that Lucchini takes its main inspiration from the Kingdom of Sicily, and that Turbaro draws its inspiration from Genoa. Remus might be Naples, Trentino, Trento, or Milan. I'm not confident enough in my Italian history to make any of these claims with certainty. I am, on the other hand, extremely confident in saying that Certosa is based on the Republic of Pirates that existed briefly in the Caribbean in the 1700s, based out of Nassau and governed by a pirate code. They just moved it to the island of Sicily. Lastly, Tylos is a fairly obvious stand-in for ancient Rome, being an ancient seat of an empire that controlled the region and would eventually fall to invaders. Let's take an overview of the history of Tilea. The first noted event in Tilea is the Elven colonization of the region. We don't know exactly when they first arrived in Tilea specifically, but their colonization of the Old World as a whole began in -4119 IC. Sometime between -2500 IC and -2000 IC, the great city of Tylos emerged. One of the oldest types of human writing comes about during this time, nowadays called Classic, said to have been gifted to man by Verena, the goddess of wisdom. Classic is still used to this day by enlightened scholars throughout the Old World. In -1780 IC, the city of Tylos falls under mysterious circumstances. In -1600 IC, the first true Skaven claws his way out of the ruins of Tylos, already obsessed with acquiring warpstone. The elves abandoned their colonies in Tilea around -1500 IC, following their defeat in the War of the Beard. During this time, a massive explosion is heard coming from the Blighted Marshes. Sometime before -1200 IC, the region that would become known as Tilea was conquered by Amenemethum the Great and became part of the Nehekaran Empire. Tilea might have been part of the domain that was granted to Caritamen the Death Scarab by Amenethum to rule as a client kingdom. Around -700 IC, a Sur seafarers spot ancient Tileans begin settling on the sites of the abandoned elven outposts. The elves begin trading with these fledgling Tileans. Around -500 IC, the dwarves of Barakvar reports the emergence of human cities in the lands around the southern tip of the Apuccini Mountains. The dwarves begin to slowly engage in trade with these humans. In or around 1 IC, the city of Lucini is founded. Other prominent cities soon also emerge, including Remes, Tubaro, and Sartosa. In 451 IC, the Tilean coast is assaulted by a combination of Tomb Kings and Dark Elven raiders. The city of Sartosa is destroyed in one of these raids. Tilea suffers a massive greenskin invasion in 475 IC, marking the beginning of the Tilean Dark Age. The prominent city of Verena was destroyed during this invasion, among many others. During a major battle in this conflict, a Tilean commander hires half of a greenskin army to fight the other half. This event marks the first time the Tileans hires mercenaries of another race, a custom they have practiced ever since. Not until 978 IC is the greenskin menace finally driven away from Tilea. In the 800s, Norskins begin raiding the coast of Tilea. The pragmatic Tileans ended up employing many of these barbarians instead of expelling them. Trade is quickly established between the two peoples. To this day, a great deal of Norskin traders and mercenaries regularly make their way to Tilea to find their fortune. In 1448 IC, Tilea participates in the reconquest of Estalia and the subsequent Arabian Crusade, but for less altruistic reasons than most of the other participants. As a result, a Tilean quarter was established in the Arabian city of Kofur, giving Tilea access to a great deal of exotic goods and establishing a permanent trade route to and from Araby. In 1699 IC, despite warnings from the dwarves that all that lies to the east were feral goblins and bad dwarves, the Varesian explorers Rico and Rabiel venture eastward in an attempt to find the land route to Ulthuan. Later, in 1714 IC, word makes its way back to Vareso that the brothers instead discovered the Empire of Great Cathay, and in so doing managed to establish the trade route between Tilea and the Far East known as the Silk Road. In 1812 IC, the Skaven-made plague known as Red Pox spreads through Britonia into northern Tilea, where it runs rampant, allowing the Skaven to sack and weaken Miragliano. The year 1948 IC is known as the Year of the Four Tyrannies. Why this is, I'm very unsure. 2000 IC marks the beginning of the period known as the Era of Enlightenment for Tilea. Tilea suffers a great famine between 2321 IC and 2399 IC, caused by hordes of mice eating Tilea's grain. This famine leads to major social unrest in the region. At some point in history, through unclear means, the then ruler of the empire, Emperor Gunther II the Faithful, was in control of parts of northern Tilea. When and how the empire gained and lost these holdings are unclear. Let's move on from history and discuss the notable places and landmarks in Tilea. I'll be marking the locations I talk about on the map with these red dots, but some places only have a vague description as to their location. In these cases, I'll be indicating that the placement is only guesswork or an approximation with these blue dots. Let's begin exploring Tilea in the north. The Irana Mountains marks the northern border of Tilea. The mountains are described as barren and is home to a few greenskins and other ne'er-do-wells. There are mentions of passes through these mountains leading to and from Britonia, some being guarded by small fortresses. As far as I know, the only pass that has been named is Novalone Pass, which only shows up on this map from the Stone and Steel supplement to the first edition RPG. Many battles between Bretonians and Miragliano mercenaries have been fought in the foothills of these mountains. An ancient city was located in the northwestern corner of Tilea. The great city has been known by many names, including Til, Tilea, and Kavsar, but it's most commonly known as Tyles. Tyles was established sometime around -2500 and -2000 IC, but some sources claim that the city is even older, built during the dawn of the world, predating the mortal races. The city was populated by both humans and dwarves, the men living on the surface while the dwarves lived below. Tyles was prosperous and extorted a tithe of slaves from the tribes living in the regions surrounding the city. Legend has it that the city was inhabited by an ancient hero named either Tyles or Tyleus, who is said by some to be the father of the Tilean people and the founder of the city of Tyles. In either -1860 IC or -1880 IC, the construction of a great tower began in the city. A tower the likes of which has never been seen since, so tall as to awe even the elves with its stature. About a century later, in -1780 IC, a stranger hooded in grey robes arrives in Tylos. The stranger strikes a deal with the inhabitants to finish the construction of the great tower. In exchange, the stranger wishes only to hang a great bell at the summit. The people of Tylos agrees, and the next night, below Morslid, at the stroke of midnight, the tower is finished and the great bell tolls 13 times, and the city of Tylos was no more. A plague of rats and a flood of black rain consumed the city and its inhabitants. The event is commonly referred to as the Doom of Kavzar. Some claim that the Tilean people are descendants of the people of Tylos, while others maintain that all of Tylos citizens perished with the city, leaving the nearby subjugated tribes to inherit the lands of Tilea. What was left of the city eventually came to be known by a different name, Skavenblight. It's unclear what happened beneath the city after the fall, for it was not until -1600 IC that the Skaven emerged at the ruins of Tylos and began expanding their mighty underground lair. The Skaven feared the surface and so did not expand far. In a desperate attempt to enlarge their domain in order to accommodate their growing numbers, in -1500 IC, the Skaven constructed a grand warpstone machine that was intended to dig deeper into the bedrock below. The device inevitably failed in a great earth-shattering explosion. The entirety of the underground city of Skavenblight was effectively destroyed and the surrounding lands were irrevocably tainted. This forced the surviving Skaven to leave their home in an event known to the Skaven as the Great Migration. Luckily for the Skaven, the very same disaster that had robbed them of their home had also triggered a series of earthquakes and volcanic eruptions that shattered the dwarven realm of Karasankor, making the dwarf holds easy prey for the homeless Skaven. Some Skaven remained and eventually rebuilt their ancestral home. To their delight, they discovered that the Great Machine had succeeded, although at a great cost. The device had cracked the earth and created a grand chasm leading deep below the earth to passages as old as the world itself. It was through this chasm that the Skaven would eventually establish their grand system of underways that would become known as the Under Empire. Skavenblight is the capital of the Skaven race and is the seat of the Council of 13, who at least in theory ruled the Skaven Empire. The city is a labyrinthine metropolis that stretches both far and deep and is likely the most densely populated city in the world. The Grand Tower of Tylos, now known as the Shattered Tower, is mirrored by an upside-down tower below it, known as the Great Temple of the Horned Rat, that stretches deep into the furthest reaches of Skavenblight. Other notable features include the Monastery of Clan Pestilence, the Clan Rictus-run Ironspike sector, the Clan Nation Lair, the Cavern of Unyielding Shadows, and perhaps most notably, the Warforges of Clan Skyr, who holds the most power of any one single clan in Skavenblight. The region near Tylos was once renowned for its lush fields of golden wheat, yet the black rain that fell during the Doom of Kavzar poisoned the region forever and flooded the fields into a gloomy marshland now known as the Blighted Marshes. The swamps are covered in a perpetual swirling mist that precious little light manages to pierce through. Half-sunken ruins dot the marshes as a reminder of its tragic past. Skaven barges travel the winding canals of the swamp, collecting black corn that grows by the riverbanks. The corn is taken to one of many great mills near the center of the marshes, so that it can be used to feed the starving masses of Skavenblight. A deep trench has been dredged through the marshes, allowing Skaven clan fleets to sail directly out of Skavenblight into the Tilean Sea. The marshes may be the home of the exceedingly poor Skaven clan, Clan Scrap. They are described as living below the Putrid Swamp, which is what the Blighted Marshes are referred to on this map from the 2nd edition RPG supplement, Old World Armory. The southern region of the Blighted Marshes are called the Zombie Swamps and is home to many undead and other dark things. Tilean prison ships anchor at the Zombie Swamps to hide themselves from prying eyes and likely to dissuade any escape. In 2192 IC, Duke Alfonso Meragliano mounted a massive offensive into the swamps in a conflict known as the Battle of the Blight. While suffering heavy casualties, the Tileans managed to push back the Skaven deeper into the Blighted Marshes and expel the Ratmen from the area surrounding Meragliano. This allowed Meragliano to expand into territory that was previously uninhabitable thanks to the Skaven. By the year 2302 IC, the Skaven returned and many townships near the edge of the Blighted Marshes disappeared. Let's move on to the Principality of Meragliano. The lower part of the region shares some of the swampy nature of the blighted marshes. It's described as a vast marshland filled with shallow lakes of tall marsh grass. On the gentle sloping hills at the edge of the marshland lies many fields of grains and vegetables, fruit orchards, pastures and vineyards, protected by a series of forts built by Borgio. The northern upland part of the region has a stony, chalky soil that makes for poor agriculture, but is used to grow olives and Fattori grapes. The region is pockmarked by the ruins of villas and burnt husks of farmsteads, a sign that the region has grown more dangerous as of late. Greenskins, beastmen and skaven can all be found skulking around here. The city of Meragliano itself is a sprawling metropolis built upon hundreds of small islands in a salt marsh that are now separated by a series of canals populated by small boats and are utilized not unlike streets. The easternmost district of the city is dilapidated and mostly abandoned as the island it was built on has started sinking into the marsh. Meragliano is somewhat unique in that it's one of the few great city-states that was not built on old elven ruins. The city reportedly has a shortage in drinking water and relies on import for their water needs. The tavern The Black Boar is located in the city, which is the favorite haunt of the infamous bounty hunter Brunner. Their ongoing battle with the Skaven has led to the creation of an elite ratcatcher guard that fight off the frequent Skaven incursions into the city. During the outbreak of Red Pox in 1812 IC, 3/4 of Meragliano's population had succumbed to the disease. Like I mentioned earlier, the Skaven attacked and sacked the city during this period of suffering. In rebuilding the damaged city, Meragliano took the chance to reorganize and beautify the city. This was accomplished mostly thanks to the efforts of one man, Leonardo da Meragliano. Sometime around 2000 IC, a young Leonardo was discovered by Prince Cosmio, the then prince of the city. Cosmio immediately recognized the man's brilliance and set Leonardo to work redesigning Meragliano, making the city much more efficient and all but impregnable from a siege. It was Leonardo that created the famous tall watchtowers of Meragliano. Unfortunately, the soft ground in the region caused the towers to lean somewhat, but thanks to the architectural brilliance of Leonardo, the towers still stand, albeit a bit crooked. This led to a trend in Tilea, where other cities started to build their own leaning towers. Before too long, Leonardo had become the court inventor of Meragliano, but the demand of his services by other cities caused him to leave his mark all over Tilea. Leonardo would eventually make his way to the Empire, where he founded the Imperial Engineering School of Altdorf in 2012 IC. Leonardo's most notable creation was a steam tank, which no other engineer has been able to truly recreate since. A prominent recent prince of Meragliano was Borgio the Besieger, who rose to power in 2004-85 IC. Under Borgio's ruthless leadership, Meragliano rose to be known as the most powerful principality in all Tilea, defeating almost all other city-states in battle at some point. The supposedly invulnerable Borgio met his doom in 2503 IC, assassinated in his bath with a poisoned toasting fork. Borgio's murderer remains unknown, but many suspect the arch-poisoner Lucrezia Belladonna, or Borgio's own wife, Dolcelata, who just so happens to be Lucrezia's sister. Borgio was apparently succeeded by a man named Marino Seleucio. How and when Seleucio rose to power is unclear, but we know he was the Prince of Meragliano by 2508 IC, during an outbreak of Yellow Ague in the city. The most notable mercenary company to come from Meragliano are Braganza's Besiegers. The company was formed by Borgio himself, but were eventually given autonomy and began traveling the old world, selling their services to the highest bidder. Luca Braganza and his men specialized in siege warfare, just like their old patron. The Marksmen of Meragliano is another mercenary company of great renown to come out of Meragliano. The company is over 100 years old and recruits exclusively from Meragliano. The village Tramaglino is located somewhere near Meragliano, close to the Blighted Marshes. North of Meragliano, near the Blighted Marshes in the foothills below the Warhammer Mountains, lies the large estate of Adolfo. The estate is cursed, and all that venture too close to it are drawn into an eternal melodrama of murder and deceit, believing themselves to be part of the Adolfo family. The heroine vampire Genevieve Dieudonné and the revolutionary Kislemite prince Vladimir Mikhail Klosowski were briefly trapped here but managed to escape. The estate is not present on any map, but it's likely somewhere around here. The town of Tuscania is located here and apparently houses an unusually large dwarf population. Tuscania appears to be the start of a Novolon Pass. The town of Ravolla is part of the Principality of Miragliano. The town is described as being the northernmost settlement on the Tilean side of the Apuccini Mountains and is famous for its vineyards. In 1425 IC, Ravolla hosted a tournament between Bretonnian and Tilean knights, a tournament which Tilea won, much to the dismay of the proud Bretonnians. After the tournament, Bretonnia was forced to relinquish their claims on Tilean lands. While Ravolla does not appear on any official map that I know of, based on the description of its position, it might be located somewhere around here. Further east is Campo Grotta. Campo Grotta started out as a fortified camp guarding the entrance to the River of Echoes that eventually evolved into a town. Campo Grotta is also noted for having a large population of dwarves. Before we continue further south, let's first cover western Tilea. The western edge of Tilea is bordered by the Apuccini Mountains. The mountains separates the relatively bountiful narrow coastal plains of western Tilea from the arid plains of Estalia. Both the mountains and the coast below are riddled with a series of natural cave systems. The mountain contains many dangerous beasts, including both harpies and manticores. They are also the home of a storm dragon called Iabus of the Sapphire Eye. Videnza is a presumably independent, small republic city-state located on the western Tilean coast. Its exact location is not specified. We can't be sure if it's located north or south of Tubaro. I'm going to place it here, but note that the city has not actually been placed on any official map. The city is surrounded by grassy coastal plains and borders the sea to the east. Videnza is ruled by a political entity known as the Council of Tears, and the banner and symbol of the city is that of a manticore. Underneath the city is a series of half-drowned catacombs inhabited by things that praise and even the Skaven. Below the city's catacomb lies the Red Vault, filled with arcane treasures, including 3 of Cadon's ancient scrolls of binding. The city belonged to Estalia at some point, but was reconquered by the Tileans, earning the ire of the nearby petty Estalian kingdoms of Gulatha and Largos, who have long since wished to recapture Videnza. It was this animosity, coupled with famine on the Estalian side of the mountains, that led Vidar, king of Largos, to declare war on Videnza in the year 103 of the Second Republic. This conflict is known as the War of the Beast. An Estalian host accompanied by skinwolves, Striga vampires, and the Mortaria, a forbidden sect of the cult of Mor, crossed the Apuccini Mountains with the goal of conquering Videnza. The Estalian host was engaged and defeated in open combat on the plains outside of Videnza with the help of a wizard trio consisting of Orsini Sardus, a local and master of Gur, Tacitus of Araby, and she who will not be named. I'm just gonna spoil it right now. She was a warfire dragon. The wizards had each bound monsters to their will in order to defeat the Estalians, given the conflict its name. Yet the War of the Beast did not end here, as the ever-opportunistic Skaven attacked and besieged the weak Videnza. The siege lasted 8 days, before the leader of the rat host was slain, scattering the remaining Skaven forces. Here is Tubaro, the City of Sirens, one of the 8 major city-states. Tubaro was built on the ruins of an elven city that was named Tilea. The city is located on a cliffside on the narrow coast beneath the Apuccini Mountains. The center of the city features a great hill, which are known as acropolises in Tilea. On top of this defensible position lies the upper city, called Altessa, and the palace of the merchant prince of Tubaro. The lower city surrounds the acropolis and is in turn surrounded by a great outer wall. A large part of the city is underground, which is called Trafuro. The harbor of Tubaro is elven made and was built inside of a large domed cavern in the cliffside below Tubaro. Tubaro's main source of export comes from mining, and so the locals spend much of their time on the ground. Some even say that the Tubaran people are more like dwarfs than men. The fact that the worship of the dwarf god Grungi is widespread amongst people does nothing to dispel this theory. Like Videnza, Tubaro has weathered many attempts to try and capture the city by Estalia, and even managed to repel an Arabian attack during Sultan Jafar's conquest of Estalia. But no siege of the city had ever been successful. That is, until 1563 IC, when the Skaven found their way into the ancient elven tunnels below the city. Tubaro fell to the Skaven onslaught, but the Prince of Tubaro at the time, Meldu Marcelli, managed to escape the city and returned at the head of a great mercenary army. With the additional aid of a high elven host, Marcelli managed to retake the city by 1565 IC. The tunnels beneath the Acropolis now features a full garrison of elite warriors to fight off any further Skaven attacks, known as the Deep Watch. These days, Tubara holds a good relationship with the Stalia. It's said that most of the foreign ships in Tubara's harbor are Stalian. In 1877 IC, a pig was elected as merchant prince of the city to avoid a potential civil war. The pig was dubbed Pigalo I, and his reign is remembered as a golden age for the city. The current prince of the city is Prince Tipaldus Marsarius de Vella. The mercenary company Pirassos Legion originated from Tubaro. It was from the ports of Tubaro that Fernando Pirasso first launched upon his near-disastrous expedition to Lustria. The jagged coastline here is colloquially known as the Fool's Rocks, as many unprepared fools have met their doom upon the many rocks and hidden reefs here. The large collection of islands along the coast are called the Isle of the Sirens. Fittingly, the islands are inhabited by bird-like creatures called sirens that lure sailors onto the deadly rocks with the beautiful songs. The Isles and the Fool's Rocks are infamously difficult to navigate. The navigator families of Tubaro each have their own secret route through the stony maze that they guard tightly. Most of the human inhabitants of the Isles are pirates who find the dangerous labyrinth of islands a perfect hiding place. There are a couple named pirate strongholds somewhere within the Isle of Sirens, including Serascuro and Isla de Sur. The part of these islands closest to Vendenza are called the Carvona Archipelago, which I'm guessing would place it on the northern end of the Isles. On the southern tip of this archipelago lies the Isle of Grief, which hosts a great cavern known as the Howling Abyss. Within this mysterious cavern lies a temple said to predate both men and elves, built by something else. Inside the temple is a powerful black-green monolith that at night is replaced by a black ash in the world, from which voices of the damned can be heard. It was within these caverns that the final battle of the War of the Beast was fought. The Skaven were defeated when the Shugon, a mysterious underwater dwelling troll-like race, were summoned from the depths and tore apart the Vermin Lord leading the Skaven army. After the battle, she took ownership of the island and its dark mysteries. A southern portion of the Isle of Sirens are called Gorgonzola. Yep, it's unclear if Gorgons can actually be found here, or if it's all just for the sake of the pun. In the book Fell Cargo, there's a reference to the Straits of the Gorgon, which I can only assume is a different name for this place. Near Gorgonzola lies the Skaven nest port of Spineport. Spineport is home to the largest clan fleet in all of Skavendom, belonging to Clan Scurvy. The entrance to Spineport is hidden amongst the rocks of the Isle of the Sirens. Sorcery is used to lure unsuspecting ships onto nearby rocks, so that Clan Scurvy may salvage the wreckage to build their own ramshackle vessels. Aguilas, sometimes spelled Aquilas, is an Estalian port city and the southernmost settlement of mainland Estalia. It's located somewhere between Estalia and Tilea on the tip of the Ebusca Peninsula. The city lies within a bay and most of the city clings to the steep surrounding slopes. The mouth of the bay is protected by a seawall called the Breakwater Wall. The palace of the city is located on top of a volcanic plug overlooking the rest of the city, and the hills surrounding the city contain olive groves. Aguilas is a center of trade and is well known for its shipbuilding. Much of the Estalian navy was birthed in the dry docks of Aguilas. The current Marquis of Aguilas is a man named Juan Narciso. The crest of the city features a bark and 2 leaping dolphins. Porto Real is an Estalian colony located in the southern parts of the Isle of Sirens, on one of the larger islands in the archipelago, facing the sea. The interior of the island is used to farm sugarcane and plantains. The governor of the colony is an Estalian noble named Emmerich Gorge, who resides in a mansion located inland among the green hills of the island. Gorge and his men were eventually revealed to be vampires and were subsequently slain by the pirate crew, the Reavers. Santa Bernadette is a free port and is said to be the southernmost settlement of any note in the Isles. The southernmost cluster of islands is known as the Labyrinth, and as the name would suggest, it's extremely difficult to maneuver. Let's move back across the Tilean Sea and talk about Eastern Tilea. In the northernmost region of Eastern Tilea lies the Principality of Trantio. The river Tarano appears to separate the Principality Miragliano from that Trantio. At least part of this river is sourced by the Cristallo River, which is in turn sourced by the River of Echoes. More on that later. The village of Scorzio is within the Principality Trentino. It's located north of Trentino itself, between the Trentine Hills and the Gulf of Pearls. The city of Viadessa is often present on fan-made maps, but the only official mention of the place that I could find is from the Man of War Corsair video game, which places it here. How official that really is, I'm not sure. The city of Trentino itself is located inland within the Trentine Hills. The city's rise to prominence is fairly recent, but it's now one of the great city-states of Tilea. Trentino's proximity to the eastern trade route spilling out of the Apuccini Mountains has made the city very profitable. The city is noted for having a large amount of dwarven architecture and an exorbitant amount of marble structures. Trentino was one of the first city-states to overthrow their prince and establish itself as a republic. In 1492 IC, the Chilean merchant and soon-to-be explorer Marco Colombo obtained a map from a drunk Norscan adventurer, allowing him to discover Lustria, where he had his share of adventures and managed to establish a friendly relationship with the lizardmen of Tlaxlan. The now wealthy explorer returned to Tilea and managed to dispossess the Republic and secure himself the title of Merchant Prince of Trentino, a title that the descendants of Colombo still hold. The ruins of Verena lie somewhere within the Principality, not too far from the city of Trentino itself. Verena fell sometime during the Greenskin invasions of 471 IC to 978 IC. A general called Justintine of Verena led the survivors of the damaged city away with a great chest containing all the city's wealth. The band of survivors were harried by the Greenskins until they were pressed up against the sea. Here they made the last stand, promising to share the treasure they carried to any who would help them. The Greenskin army, led by Warlock Ugwarg, attacked and were defeated by the Chileans, who fought inspired by the great treasure chest. Although Verena was razed by the Greenskins and never rebuilt, the legacy of the city can still be felt, as this legend is the origin of the custom of bringing a pay chest out into battle to inspire the troops that most mercenary armies practice to this day. Most of the principality is occupied by hills known as the Trentine Hills. The city of Trentino is famous for Trentine, a rare pink vein mineral which, based on its name, can presumably be found in the Trentine Hills. To the west along the coast lies the Republic of Remus. The waters here are noted as being rich in fish and its people master fishermen. The northernmost settlement of this region might be Urbimo. Although Urbimo shows up on a lot of fan-made maps, I have only found a single reference to it in the Man of War Corsair video game. By the mouth of the river Remo, on the tip of a massive peninsula jutting into the Chilean Sea, lies the city of Remus. The city is built on top of old Elmer ruins and sports a series of 3 walls that connect with one another and completely encloses the crown in the peninsula. The most notable feature of the city is a massive circular harbor originally built by the elves, which much of the city surrounds. The entrance to this artificial bay is spanned by a huge bridge, known as the Great Raymond Bridge, that connects the 2 sides of the city. The bridge is crowded by buildings, towers, and even palaces. In 1487 IC, the city was attacked by Dark Elf raiders. The attackers could not breach the harbor, however, so the fighting began on the bridge. In this battle, that would be remembered as the Battle of the Bridge, Remus managed to hold each end of the bridge, denying the Dark Elf entrance into the city itself. Many of the buildings on the bridge were burned, and many of its occupants were taken away as slaves before the Dark Elves finally retreated. To this day, Remus holds a deep hatred for the Nagarothi. The Temple of Myrmidia in Remus is one of the 2 major places of worship for the cult of Myrmidia. Tileans insist that the god Myrmidia was raised in the Tilean city of Remus, while Estalians claim that she was raised in the Estalian city of Magrita. This debate has caused no small amount of enmity between the faithful of these 2 different peoples. In the outer city, there is a massive temple topped by a giant golden fist dedicated to the god Solkin, known as the Fist of Retribution and as one of the gods of law. The temple is said to have taken 300 years to complete and may be the only such temple in the world, since the worship of a harsh god like Solkin is rare outside of Remus. The cult of Solkin insists that Solkin saved the city from the demon Mardag in the earliest days of Remus. During the famine that struck Tilea between 2321 IC and 2399 IC, the tyrannical merchant prince of Remus, a man called Emilio Mundo, tried to profit from the situation by hoarding grain. This was met by a popular uprising that dethroned the prince and established Remus as a republic. The ruined remains of the old fortress belonging to the prince still stands between the first and second wall. The republic is now led by a council called the Council of 50. 3 members of this council is chosen at random each year to rule as a triumvirate. Remus may have been a republic for a time before this event, according to the book Blood and Steel, but if so, the exact details of that period eludes me. If canon, that would make the current leadership of the city the second republic of Remus. A man called Curious Geezer is referred to as first citizen of Remus. This is strange, as first citizen was the title of the Roman emperors, suggesting that Geezer was the sole ruler of Remus. Geezer is famous for having sailed to Albion before the mist lifted, where he brought back 2 giants and a druid as hostages. This trio became mercenaries and would collectively become known as the Giants of Albion. Since this mercenary company is still active, and if we assume that Albion druids live a normal human lifespan, then Geezer can't have predated the Second Republic. Perhaps Geezer was attempting to uproot the Republic at the time. If so, his ambitions failed as he was stabbed to death at the docks as he returned from his Albion expedition. The most notable Riemann mercenary company is Rico's Republican Guard. The company was originally formed during the Bloody Republican Rebellion of Remus, but would eventually have a falling out with the New Republic and were forced to fight their way out of the city. Their current relationship with Remus is unclear. South of Remus, there's a town called Rif Rafa. Here, a battle was fought in which Al-Mukhtar's desert dogs managed to overrun an enemy army. The battle is simply referred to as the Rout of Rif Rafa. Olesi is another town I can only find reference to in the Man of War Corsair video game. Somewhere, presumably in the Republic of Remus, lies the settlement of Scorsese. The road between Remus and Scorsese is noted for being patrolled by a legendary band of road wardens called the Men with No Names. To the east of Remus and south of Trentino lies the Principality of Pavona. The fields here, located between the river Remo and the Apuccini Mountains, are very fertile and are crowded with farms. The city of Pavona is the smallest of all the great city-states. It only recently grew to a notable stature. Pavona is famous for having a great many bridges. These bridges stretch above the streets, separating the poorer lower levels from the city's nobility above. The lower streets of Pavona are supposedly deliberately made to be confusing to navigate as a defensive measure. Pavona challenges Trentino's monopoly of trade arriving from the east. This has led the 2 cities to develop an intense rivalry. The hills between Trentino and Pavona are known as some of the most war-torn regions in all Tilea because of this frequent fighting between the cities. Despite the numerous wars fought between them, the cities have a tendency to ally with one another whenever one of the other city-states tries to make war on either. Pavona has had a great many merchant princes as of late, each ruling only briefly before succumbing to some mishap or accidentally ingesting some poisonous herbs. In truth, the true leader of Pavona is Lucrezia Belladonna. Lucrezia lost her first husband, the then prince of the city, when she was very young. But determined not to lose her power over Pavona, she quickly remarried, and once that marriage no longer suited her, her second husband mysteriously died, only to be replaced by another. This repeated itself many times over. It is said, though not out loud, that Lucrezia is a master poisoner and has multiple assassins in her employ. Lucrezia is considered the most beautiful woman in Tilea, and by some the most beautiful in the whole of the old world. And it's a dangerous thing to disagree with that. On top of all of this, Lucrezia is a skilled sorceress as well. South of Pavona lies the famously fertile fields of the Republic of Arezzo. The city of Arezzo is located on top of a raised hill surrounded by flat fields. The city is heavily fortified with strong walls that tower above any approaching army. This defensible position has served Arezzo well, but has also forced many concessions out of the city since they cannot build outward without spilling into the lower ground. As a result, Arezzo expands upwards, building their houses tall, stacking them atop of one another, and pressing the streets below into narrow claustrophobic pathways. Just like Remus, Arezzo became a republic during the famine between 2321 IC and 2399 IC, as they too rose up against their merchant prince who was hoarding grain. The Republic of Arezzo operates through a voting system where each noble family is divided into one of 4 political factions denoted by specific color: red, green, blue, or yellow. One of these parties are then democratically voted into power. These colored factions are also used as teams for local games. Arezzo or the surrounding region may house windmills, since constructing them was a profession of Dadalo before his imprisonment in the Leaning Tower of Arezzo. Dadalo eventually escaped his imprisonment with the help of a pair of homemade wings. He would later go on to form the most notable mercenary company of Arezzo, the Birdmen of Catrasa. The famous strategist Kusipalotta, who penned The Art of Statecraft, is an exiled princess of Arezzo. To the west lies a harbor town called Porto Maggiore, yet another settlement I can only find in the video game Man of War Corsair. Before we finish off the rest of the peninsula, let's cover the Tilean side of the mountain range that shadows most of eastern Tilea, the Apuccini Mountains. The Apuccini Mountains is a short mountain range that separates Tilea from the lands of the border princes. The mountains are rugged and contain little in the form of vegetation, and are a source of Tilea's white marble. They are relatively low compared to the vaults in the north, and so does not snow over as frequently. There are bandit strongholds in the mountains, and many greenskins can be found there as well. The tribe of the Blueface Orcs, known for their piracy and poor relationship with the goblins, live here along with the Broken Nose Goblin tribe, renowned for having stolen 2 war machines from Caracazul. The foothills of the mountains are usually forested and are filled with all manner of dangerous beasts, including hydras. In the corner where the Irana Mountains, the Apuccini Mountains, and the vaults meet lies a dwarf hold named Karak Exvilas. The hold is fairly modest with a population of around 5,000. The hold is ruled by King Heragar Steelclad. Close to Karak Exvilas is the Skaven stronghold of Foul Peak. Foul Peak is an industrial stronghold that is home to Clan Ectric and their many slaves. Clan Ectric are especially fond of lightning, and so have erected lightning catchers at the summit of their mountain to collect electricity from the frequent storms in the mountains. There is a single pass from Tilea, cutting through the vaults all the way to the Empire, named Brenheim Pass. Brenheim Pass is only usable during the summer months as snow otherwise seals off the passage. At the summit of the pass lies the Inn of Brandyholm, that functions as both a shelter for weary travelers and as a trading post, allowing the local dwarves that inhabit the vaults to trade with Tilean and Imperial humans. While Brenheim becomes unusable for large portions of the year, there is one other route between Tilea and the Empire that was discovered by the Tilean explorer Guido Pasolini in 2235 IC called the River of Echoes. The River of Echoes is an underground river that is the source of both the Cristallo River in Tilea and the River Sol in Wissenland. This miraculous tunnel is over 300 miles long and now contains an underground Tilean settlement called Alimento, built on top of the spring that feeds the river, located near the middle of the tunnel. The Tilean side of the tunnel ends at the fortified outpost of Campo Grotta, while the village of Kotshofen marks the imperial edge of the river. Wissenland have officially relinquished control of their side of the tunnel to the Tileans, presumably Miragliano, to ensure that trade continues to flow into their province. On the western side of the vaults lies the dwarf hold of Karak Buftar. Not much is known about this hold, but it's marked as a major hold in the 8th edition Dwarf Army book. Somewhere among the wooded foothills below the vaults lies the massive gates of Karak Dar. The dwarven hold of Karak Dar fell nearly 1,000 years ago. The hold used to function as a trading post in ages past, a place where dwarves traded steel for grain with the primitive tribes that would one day become the Tileans. Karak Dar features a massive underground road cutting beneath the vaults that can theoretically take a traveler all the way to the Empire. The road is only known to a few dwarves and even fewer men, but the fallen hold and its maze of pathways is infested by countless dangers, including the night goblins of the Sharp Nose and Black Fang tribes, along with trolls, basilisks, and many other horrors. Within the mountains overlooking the pass below lies a small dwarven outpost called Kasad Sedesund, noted for being the southernmost still standing dwarf outpost in the Apuccini Mountains. Beyond the forest near Trentio lies a pass that serves as the major pathway into Tilea through the mountains. The pass goes by different names depending on the source, The 2nd edition RPG names the pass as the Old Dwarf Pass, while the 1st edition RPG names it Via Nano. In the 8th edition Dwarf Army book, they seem to refer to it as Crystal Gap. Either way, the pass ends at the Tortilla Road in the lands of the Border Princes, where the road quickly links up with the Old Silk Road. Below that lies Saraxel, an overrun dwarven outpost with not much known about it. Just east of Pavona lies a Skaven quarry by the name Queequel. The small warren belongs to Clan Scar. The region is apparently plagued by frequent earthquakes. Recently, there are rumors that Queequel have uncovered something valuable and dangerous deep below the Apuccini Mountains. The southernmost mountain passage into Tilea is known as Dark Maiden Pass. The pass begins near Pavona in the west and ends at the Pavona Road on the Border Prince's side of the mountains, where it too links up with the Old Silk Road. Finally, let's tackle the very tip of Tilea. The Principality of Lucini is very prosperous. The lands are exceedingly fertile and are famous for their breed of fine horses. Near the southern tip of Tilea lies the city of Lucini, perhaps the oldest human city in Tilea. Lucini has an exceptionally strong navy and is in constant conflict with the nearby pirates of Sartosa. The harbor city is built on old elven ruins made of black stone. The ruins are so great that the rubble extends far beyond the city itself. There are many ancient passages under the city, said to be filled with equal measures of treasure and ghosts. Many of the locals maintain that some evil lurks beneath the city and among the old ruins outside the city. The city is centered on a great acropolis, on top of which lies the Prince's Palace, the Temple of Numidia, and the Temple of Lucan and Lucina. The city also hosts the Great Mausoleum of Mor, supposedly the greatest monument to Mor in the old world. Every 10 years, an important convocation dedicated to Mor is held here. The Knightly Order of Mor, known as the Black Guard, has their headquarters here in Lucini. Within the twisting alleyways of Lucini lies the Assassin's Guild, employers of the man claiming the title of the greatest assassin in all Tilea, the Black Crow, currently living under the stolen identity of Count Banco de Gusta. A great military academy called the Aquila Academy is also located here in Lucini. It serves as the headquarters for the secret society, the Knights of Magritta. The city is said to have been founded by the twins Lucan and Lucina. Lucan is said to have been a great warrior, while Lucina a great sorceress. According to the founding myth of Lucini, when they were young, the siblings became lost and stumbled upon a two-headed leopard inside of a cave in the Acropolis that the city would eventually be built around. The she-leopard protected the twins from all manners of monsters and told a prophecy that they would rule as king and queen over Lucini, but it also warned them that their ancestors would war with one another for the city. She turned out to be correct in both regards, as the two dynasties have fought for power for as long as anyone can remember. The symbol of the city is that of a leopard, in honor of this mythical beast who some say still lives deep within the Acropolis. The current ruler of Lucini is Lorenzo Lupo. Lorenzo claims descent from both Lucan and Lucina, and so unites the two warring families by taking the throne. Lorenzo is considered a bit of an eccentric, since he's utterly obsessed with his city's heritage. He wears armor of the old style and takes great care to exercise in the fashion of his ancestors. He has filled his palace with statues and works of art from the earliest ages of Tilea. Lorenzo Lupo, in keeping with his ancestors, always insists on fighting on foot in the front lines, which has earned him the respect of his soldiers. The pirate Giordano Paolo, also known as Sesto, is referred to as the sixth son of the Prince of Lucini. Depending on the time frame, this may or may not make him Lorenzo's son. Lucini has produced two mercenary companies of note, Leopold's Leopard Company, who consist of the disgraced guard of the Temple of Lucan and Lucina that now attempts to redeem themselves by sending part of their earnings to the temple, and Vesperos Vendetta, a group of duelists led by an exiled nobleman of Lucini. Most of the southern tip of Tilea is occupied by the plain of Lucini, a large flat area where much agriculture takes place, but their summers are hot beyond what most men of the empire can manage. The plain starts roughly around the city of Lucini in the west and ends at the river Lupanaro in the east. A battle took place here at some point in a settlement called Aldante. Here is Metopua and Pavesano, yet another two settlements I can only find reference to in Man of War Corsair. The very tip of mainland Tilea is known as Cappuccino. Because why not? Around 1017 IC, a Norscan fleet from Certosa was defeated here by a Licinian army. Beyond the Principality of Licini, across the Pirates' Current, lies the island of Certosa. The island has a jagged coastline and features many high rises of limestone that towers over the waters below. The porous rock has riddled the island with many coves and caves that pirates make good use of, as the island is dotted by many pirate strongholds. The island was formed in ancient times by a volcanic eruption of the now semi-dormant volcano known as Mount Ertinia. The volcanic soil of the island is very fertile, but the rocky terrain makes farming here difficult. Yet there are some farms on the island, producing a modest amount of wheat, olives, and grapes. The waters around Certosa are similarly bountiful and supplies the island with its main source of food. Grey krakens can occasionally be spotted along the shores, however. The Pirates' Current is subject to such a strong current that it's next to impossible to land on the northern side of the island. The southern shore of Certosa is known as the Skull Sands, which consist of a treacherous sandbank where the unexperienced are sure to run aground. The interior of the island is occupied by many villas built on the hills in the shadow of Mount Ertinia. It is here the pirate lords of Certosa live. Certosa sports no true nobility, but the rich and often retired captains that makes up the pirate lords is the closest counterpart they have. The Free City of Certosa is a ramshackle collection of buildings with a mixture of Elven, Dwarven, Tilean, and Arabian architecture. The city features a solid wall and several bunkers built into the cliff sides, making the city almost impenetrable. Certosa is built along the shore of a 100 feet tall cliff face, and so much of the city is vertical as a result. Bridges and scaffolding covers the city to allow travel up this steep cliff. A lot of taverns in Certosa are traditionally located within hollowed out limestone caverns along the cliff where most pirates on leave can be found. The main street of the city is known as Peg Street. It follows the contours of the cliff along the lower part of the city. The port of Certosa is known as Pirates Bay. Pirates Bay proudly features a 20-foot tall statue depicting Jack of the Seas in the middle of the bay. Jack of the Seas is seen as kind of a patron saint of the island. Some even go as far as to leave offerings at the base of the statue. The island is said to have been created for Jack's sake, and to pay back his debt to both Ranald and Manan, he became the first pirate to sail from the island. Or so the story goes. The city of Certosa was one of the first Tilean cities, along with Licini, Ramus, and Tubaro, being established sometime after 1 IC on top of old Elven ruins. In 451 IC, the city was attacked and razed by a combined force of Dark Elves and Cetra's fleet. The island lay largely abandoned under the nominal rule of Licini until the year 1017 IC, when Norscan raiders arrived and occupied the ruins. Later, in 1240 IC, Arabian corsairs began harassing the coastline of Tilea. The Tileans began relying more and more on Norscan mercenaries to keep their shore safe. In response, the corsairs attacked the Norscan stronghold on Certosa, capturing it for themselves. In 1501 IC, following the Arabian Crusades, a Tilean mercenary army led by Prince of Licini named Luciano Catenna finally recaptured the island. Luciano established Certosa as a principality, part of the larger Licinian domain, ruled by his own descendants. During this time, the city was rebuilt and the island began hosting a great deal of mercenary fleets. The mercenary companies of the island rebelled in 1757 IC against the current prince of Certosa, Luciano Suprania. This outed prince eventually made his way to Lustria to establish the settlement of Port Reaver. The mercenary companies on the island turned to piracy, and the anarchy that swept through the island eventually faded as these newly made pirates came to an understanding with one another. Despite what others might claim, Certosa is not a lawless place. Certosa is considered neutral ground according to the Pirates' Code. punishment for breaking the code is delivered swiftly and harshly. The captains in port annually elect their own pirate prince of Sartosa, who functions as the figurehead of the principality, yet holds very little power in reality compared to the other princes of Tilea. Their main duty is to settle disputes between other captains. The current prince is known only as the Pirate Princess of Sartosa, who is said to be exceedingly cruel. The princess may have succeeded the pirate prince known as Malek the Abyss, who was assassinated by a Lucinian assassin. The most notable mercenary company of Sartosa are Longdrang Slayer pirates. Captain Longdrang and his men found misfortune when their ship sank on the shores of Sartosa, losing rare dwarf ales in the process. This dishonor was too much for them to bear, so they swore the Slayer oath. Based in a Sartosan stronghold that previously belonged to a pirate named Capitano Sisako, they now travel the seas on the ship the Fair Freygar in search of their own glorious deaths. Near the eastern bank of the river Lupanaro lies the tomb of Amenethum. Amenethum was a Nehekaran king from Sandri that conquered the lands of the border princes and most of Tilea during the golden age of Nehekara. Amenethum rose along with the other long-dead rulers of Nehekara during the awakening of the Tomb Kings in -1151 IC, leaving his tomb currently unoccupied. They say that Amenethum, despite being an accomplished conqueror in his time, is now content to rule the oceans of Nehekara. He and his mighty fleet can often be seen patrolling the Black Gulf. The settlement of Pugno lies, or did at some point lie, here. The easternmost outpost of Tilea is the massive fortress of Monte Castello. The fort stands on a small hill overlooking the Gulf of Tears, on a peninsula between the Bay of Rex to the north and the Black Gulf to the south. The citadel was originally built by the elves, but was captured by the dwarves, presumably during the War of the Beard, who reinforced the site further. Much later, the mercenary commander Ferrante built the current fort upon these foundations to protect Lucini from the Greenskins in the east. The fortress hosts one of the most beloved pieces of art in all Tilea, a fresco called The Five Seasons, painted by the artist Tino Verdi. The fortress is now staffed and maintained by contributions from all the Tilean cities as a unified defense of Tilea from foreign invaders. Monte Castello has never fallen. Famously, in 2401 IC, 500 men inside the fortress withstood a year-long siege by a host of 10,000 greenskins led by Unguth the Vile. During the siege, the commander of the fort, a man named Garieso, was mortally wounded. In an attempt to avoid panic among the men, his daughter, named Mona Lisa, donned his armor. Lisa's deception was eventually discovered, but she managed to keep the men fighting, leading the defense for the remainder of the siege. Lisa was ultimately struck down as well the very same day that a relief army from Lucini arrived to lift the year-long siege. The relief force discovered that only 25 of the defenders still remain alive inside, defending the fort to their last. Lisa has since gained legendary status in Tilea. Her likeness is now considered good luck and is often carried on Tilean standards into battle. The edge of Tilean's eastern border is marked by Wrecker's Run, a river that cuts in between Tilea and the lands of the border princes and empties into the Bay of Rex. The Lisa Road, presumably named after the aforementioned girl, runs across here and likely leads all the way to Lucini. And that is pretty much Tilea. There's a lot more lore here to dive into, but this video is long enough as it is. Just for fun, here's a list of a couple of places in Tilea that are named but with no specified location. I'm sorry this video took so long to come out. I should hopefully be a lot faster with my next video. If anyone has any suggestions of what region or topic I should cover next, tell me and I'll make sure to consider it. I'd also appreciate some critique on both the video or on any lore I may have gotten wrong. Finally, here is a list of the sources I used in making this video, in case anyone wants to fact check.